Okay, so we're back in the studio. Happy New Year, depending on when you're watching. Today's video, we're going to work through a second light. We're going to look at demonstrating some fairly subtle variations between umbrellas, octas, positioning of that light, what the modifier is doing, and how it can add some vibrancy to your picture, begin to even things out, and also about shaping the body again. Hopefully by now you will have understood some of the other studio lessons that I've already made for kind of beginner lighting. So let's jump into our studio. This would be like a fairly standard commercial rental studio space. So it's like 8.5 meters wide, 9 meters long, 5 meters high. Fairly big space, but it doesn't matter too much because we're going to put a set together. So I've got our model, I've got our positioning here with our Octa. Let's just have a look at what we've got on that. So our Octa is at 9.5. And it's going to stay at 9.5 all the way through this demonstration. So we know what the Octa is doing and we can kind of forget about it and we can really concentrate on what that second light is doing. We've got some kind of gym equipment here. Let's say we're doing like a fitness shoot, fashion lookbook shoot. And just to add some variation to this and make it a little bit more interesting to learn from the lesson, I'm going to bring some carpet in. Then I'm going to bring one large flat behind the model, and then I'm going to bring in a second flat from the side at 90 degrees. So really simple set with this. These are like super high flats. They wouldn't necessarily be this high normally. It doesn't matter too much. It's just we're building a wall, and what I'm trying to do is minimize any bounce that's coming off the other walls so we don't get distracted by kind of stray light. A box set, but it's open on this side. I'm going to call this our base shot. We can jump in and have a look what that is. Let me just show you the front of the Octa has some kind of diffusion on it. So it's a little bit above head height. You'd expect with that, we get these clear catch lights in the eyes that are a little bit above the center. I've got to fall off into shadow on the off side of the model. So it's getting quite dark around here. Fairly soft shadow spreading out onto the wall. And you can see that again on the exercise ball. And our camera setting is going to stay the same. We're shooting at ISO 160. Fairly standard. I've got f8, and that's not going to change. Just so that we always know what we're trying to get out of this is understanding what the second light is doing. First thing we're going to do is we're going to bring this large umbrella in. It's a 150. So you can see on this, I've got a black white. So it's white on the inside. And then if we click on the gels, you see I've got a half CT orange on this. So I'm just warming this light up just a little bit, but also so it doesn't get confusing, I've got a half CT orange on the other light. So I'm kind of balancing these gels out. I've got a lot of red and orange already in this set, but I'm kind of toning everything so it sits together. And let's go back to this umbrella that's pointing down into the ground. Let me just zoom in. So the light is bouncing up into the umbrella, so we know it's going to bounce down onto the floor and bounce back up into the model. And we can test that by just seeing just the light only. Zoom out. Main light is off in this example, and it's just the side light. A base version, then image on the right, we bring that umbrella in, and then we turn off the Octa so that we've just got this side light. And let's look at that side light in detail. Doing some interesting things on here. It's adding these nice highlights onto the back of the rings and the gym equipment. It's picking up this little highlight on the side of the wood. That's all great. It's adding a highlight on the skin and across the feet. And it's just shaping the body and it's evening out that tone that was a little bit dark before. Let's see them when they're in together. And again, we haven't adjusted the camera exposure with this. We're just pushing in with that light. So we're still getting the main light that's coming from the front is dominant here because we're getting this shade that's kind of pushing down the face. That works quite nicely. And it's a fairly subtle way of just pushing light down into the floor and bouncing it back up to the model. Another variation that we could do with this, which may be a little bit less subtle, but again, might work quite well if you're trying to emphasize maybe sweat. Maybe it's about the working out vibe. So you want that kind of glistening body. We can have a bit more of a direct light. We're pushing it into the umbrella. The umbrella also is still the black white, so it's not a silver. That will create a much more pronounced feel to it. Still has that gel on. So the light is bouncing into here and it's spreading and then it's hitting the model's skin. And let's compare the two. So this is the bounce umbrella, and then this is the direct umbrella on this side. Look at the difference between the faces. On this one, where it's the bounce light, you've got that kind of shaping feel. We've got more shadow. And here we're suddenly bringing the side of that face forward. Again, that may work better, like I said, if you want that kind of like sweaty kind of textural feel, or you've got kind of a makeup artist that is working with that in mind. It's evening out the shadow on this side, but also it's interesting to see what the spread of those two lights are. So this is the umbrella bouncing down, and then this is the pushing into the umbrella, but it's more flat, so it's bouncing across. Look at the real difference with the background. Because we're firing into that open umbrella, there's a much greater spread. When we're bouncing down onto the floor, it's a lot darker, fade off into the top corner. And again, slight difference in the way it's picking up on the exercise gimbal. It's a little bit bright also on the front of the set where that large umbrella is throwing the light back into the image. But the main thing is just to compare our final version of this. What is it doing on the face? There's a little bit more of a highlight. If you look at the bridge of the nose, more of a highlight there. It's kind of evening out that light in the eye socket, less of a shadow under the chin, jawline. What you will notice is that this leg is casting a slightly heavier shadow here because it feels like it's a more direct light source. And let's just zoom around so we can see what that is. If we kind of like that direct light source, maybe it's a little bit hard for us. We could swap this to an Octa. So the Octa is a 120. We had an umbrella, it's a 150, but we're spinning it around now. We've got diffusion panel on here. We've still got the gel on, but we've got internal and external diffuser. So that's going to make the light quite soft. And let's have a look to compare that. The direct umbrella, and then on the right-hand side, is with the Octa. But overall, the difference isn't like super pronounced with these two. The umbrella and the Octa are doing fairly similar things. It's only really when we switch to the side light only version that we can see the difference. And it's quite subtle. You should be able to see it in this version. If you look at this side of the face, with that open direct umbrella, we're getting more bounce that's coming off the other side of the set, on the ceiling and the studio as well. But you can see it's a little bit lighter. So the light is kind of pushing through, it's bouncing back and it's coming back in to hit the model. And you can also slightly see the difference on the arm, as opposed to on this side, it's a little bit darker. And that's because that Octa is going through more diffusion. It's a softer light, but the fall off is going to be quicker. Less light, for example, is also hitting that exercise ball. So the light is kind of focused a little bit more on the model. The fall off isn't so much. You're not getting as much bounce from this side coming back into the model. And this is why it's always really good to take that additional shot when you're adjusting your second or third light without the main light on, because it might be hard to see that when all the lights are on, to see what the real differences are. You can also see a slight difference here with the nose. We're getting a little bit more bounce on this side. It's picking up a little bit of the side of the nose. Overall, in terms of the exposure on the side where we're actually focusing on right now, where the light's coming in, it's pretty much the same. And let's just flick between the two. Bounce umbrella. It's a little further away, it's a little bit more open. We're spreading that light out and it's hitting the rest of the set. When we've gone with this Octa and it's a little smaller, we're concentrating the light. It's not traveling as far, it's not bouncing off the back of the set, and it's not coming in and filling in the shape as much. And again, if we're not sure on that, we can just see that on the side image when it's just the Octa on its own. Another variation that we could do with this, maybe to bring a little bit more drama or a little bit more shaping quality to the light, is just bring this Octa up. So let's just compare the two. Pretty much the position is the same. It's just the height that we're changing this. Also, sorry, I should have added this earlier, but at the minute, the side light, the power is always the same. So it's 8.5 when it's the umbrella, 8.5 when it's the Octa, and then it's still 8.5 when it's Octa up high. Just the modifier that we're changing on the position of the light. The gel is still the same as well. And let's compare those two side by side. On the left, we have the close Octa, and then on the right, we have the high Octa. And it's a little bit more shaping. You may find it hard to see, but it will be fairly obvious when we turn off that main light. There's a subtle difference in the way the shadow is falling across the face. Shaping under the jawline is a little bit more pleasing when the Octa is up high. I find it's a little bit more pleasing when the Octa is up high. Also shapes the eyelid and the brow when the Octa is above. And if we're not sure on that, let's just compare the side lights on their own. And there it's suddenly more noticeable. Kind of taking it away from the model a bit because we're putting it up high, but also it's shaping the face a little bit more. So we're sitting that highlight on the cheekbone, which we always know helps. The fall off is more gradual when it's the top down. And then the shadow under the chin is also a little bit more pronounced than it is on this side. So that's the more flat Octa. This is the top-down Octa. A little bit more light on the hairline could also be more pleasing. Slight difference in the way that the light is hitting the exercise ball as well. And again, these are like subtle variations, but you'll really notice it when you put your light setup together. So let's look at those side by side with the main light on as well. For me, with the Octa up high, it kind of sits together a little better. Get a slightly more kind of 3D human feel to it. And as we've talked about loads before in the past, lighting from above is kind of something we're more used to, so we tend to read the image a little bit more naturally. And here's something that I like to use a lot. Put this sock umbrella on. You can get Photech ones, Profoto ones, kind of putting a large diffusion over the front. And you can have obviously an umbrella that's silver on the inside or an umbrella that's white, but you're pushing the light back through that diffusion. And here the light's going to bounce down, but also it's going to spread out because you're firing that light into the umbrella and it's coming out through that diffusion panel. See the difference already. If we look at what's happening with the background and look at the spread here, you can see the light sitting on the backdrop a little bit more. But when we bring it to that sock umbrella, it's a different spread of light hitting that backdrop. Let's look at them as the final images side by side. And it's a really noticeable difference. This is much softer light. It's not hitting the model so directly. The exposure feels different. Light is still on 8.5, so the power is the same. The height of the light is pretty much the same, but we're putting it through that diffusion. We're changing the angle. So actually we're getting a kind of more natural feel to the light that's coming through. So here again, we've got back to this idea that we're shaping the face and we're not so obviously kind of leading with that second light. Let's look at them with the main light off and compare the two of them. So again, remember the light is still on 8.5. This is much more soft and it's much more natural. With this one, we kind of really notice where the light's coming from. It looks quite artificial. This one could be a window light, for example. Let's look at them side by side again with the final version with the main light on. So that's the high octa and that's the sock umbrella. The good thing to do with this, let's go back to our baseline shot and then the high octa and then the sock umbrella. You will have different preferences for this. The middle one, like I said earlier, might work really well if you're kind of looking at muscle tone or you're trying to give sort of editorial feel, like workout skin emphasis might work really well with that top down light, and it's a little bit more contact with the skin because it's a slightly more kind of direct light that we've got. With this one, we're maybe sitting everything back. It's just lifting up that base image. So this was the base image and this is the shoot through. It just gives a bit of a lift. It doesn't make it look like it's just a one light source, evens things out, but it's not as obvious as down Octa that we had. So 3 kind of fairly simple versions. And then I'm going to bring in this umbrella again, bring it a little bit closer. So let me show you where the umbrella was before. Direct umbrella is here and it's 150 and it's 8.5. And then close umbrella is still the same size, 150, and it's still 8.5. So we're just bringing it in a little bit. Let's compare those two side by side. Direct umbrella on the left, close umbrella on the right. We're talking about like a fairly subtle difference, but we're shifting that like dominance of the frame. So with this one on the right, suddenly that side of the face is kind of coming forward a bit. It looks a lot more obviously lit. The shadow around the knee is a little deeper and more concentrated because we're bringing that light source in. It's going to define the shadow a bit more, give it a bit more emphasis. There's a difference in the way the shadow is hitting the background, or the way the light, is hitting the background. And here it's a more diffused, softer shadow. And here it's a little bit more exposed. And you'll notice a slight shift in the difference of the shadow under the exercise ball as well. And the way to really see that is, again, we'll turn the main light off and we'll see them side by side. And you'll really notice this difference. On the right-hand side is that close umbrella. You can see actually it's catching an eye, which we're not really seeing in the left-hand side. It's kind of wrapping around the body. We notice it more on the off-side leg. It's bringing our attention into the back of the frame, the kind of gym elements, because more of that light is hitting there. And a harder edge maybe to the shadow. But if we compare them side by side, we can still see there's a difference here. There's a more dominant feel on the right-hand side. Maybe it feels a bit more balanced than dominant. That might be a better way of saying it. It's quite clearly pushing light in from that right-hand side. Let's just look at that again, see that umbrella, and nothing else has changed. Now what we can also do is we're going to make that a smaller umbrella and see what difference that has. Sometimes you'll have like mismatched gear that you've hired, or the only gear that you have available. Maybe you've got like a large umbrella and a small umbrella. I'm still keeping this on 8.5, still got the gel on it, but let's see the difference first of all with the two main images. So close umbrella on the right-hand side, small umbrella, same position. The thing I would notice immediately, punchy shadow under the chin. The kind of level of contrast of the shadow is higher in the smaller umbrella. It's a smaller light source, so we'd expect that. It's less diffuse, it's less spreading around the frame. You've got a small torch or a really large torch, the difference that you're going to have when you shine that on an object. And that's essentially what we're doing with this. And it becomes really pronounced when we look at the second light only. If we look at the background, much more even spread of light on the large close umbrella than there is on the small umbrella. With the small umbrella, with the shadow coming from the other side of the gym equipment, much more defined shadow around the feet and ankles, because again, it's a smaller light source, so we're going to get that harder edge. And it's not a huge difference. It's a 150 umbrella versus a 105 umbrella, but it's a much more concentrated feeling of light. The main shot side by side again, more pronounced contrasty feeling from that small light. And what would happen if we're going to bring that in even closer? So the light is the 105 again, so it's still that small light, and it's still got the color gel on it, but the power has moved down to 7. I'll put the power up to 8.5 and just make another variation of that so we can see that, so we're comparing like for like. Let's compare the two and be clear what we're looking at here. So this is a small umbrella at 8.5, and then on the right hand side, small umbrella at 8.5, but it's much closer. It's kind of bleached out the skin. The highlight is too intense, so that's why I brought it down to 7. Let's compare those two. So on the left-hand side, we've got the small close umbrella at 7, 7.1. And then on the right-hand side, we've got it at 8.5 where it was before. We can immediately rule out the 8.5, it's too bright. So let's focus on the 7 and see what that's doing. And we're going to compare small umbrella and small close umbrella. Then you may look at it and say, I can't really see what the change is. But we should know what we're looking for. We should find that actually the shadow is a little bit more punchy because we're close in. Again, the spread of the light is not going to be as wide because we're close in. We've sort of concentrated that. But if we're not sure, we can just compare the two side lights only as we did before. Small umbrella, but pulled back a little bit. And then on the right-hand side, small umbrella, a little bit closer, but at 7. You can see the fall off from light to shade is much quicker, more pronounced, very clearly like lit from one side. Fall off into shadow is quite immediate, it's quite dark on the other side. We can also see that in the background. We're getting this shadow here from the gym equipment, which we're not seeing quite so much on the left-hand side with that umbrella pulled further back because the light is spreading. But also look what's happening with the exercise ball. We're not really getting a highlight at all on the exercise ball, but we are getting on this one when the light is pulled back. And again, look at the light spread onto the floor. Further back the light goes, the more it's going to spread out into the floor. So the exposure may be same where it's hitting like the skin, but using that smaller umbrella and pushing it in close means that we're actually getting a bit more of a contrasty feel, getting more depth to the shadow. And again, this may be a preference of what you want to do with this. So let's compare the final version of this. And there's a couple of things to note with this. Moving that umbrella in closer with the small umbrella, you can see actually around the feet area, there's less separation. We're not getting this kind of pronounced feeling of the light because the exposure on this side is similar to the exposure we're getting from the main Octa. Also, this shadow at the back doesn't have a hard, crisp edge to it. In the body, there's a little bit more sense of shadow. And then again, under the chin, a little bit more defined shadow, a little bit more contrasty. The fall off from light to shade is a little bit quicker here. So we're not getting the bounce off the far wall, for example, that we were getting on the other image. You're getting more of a strut feel from the gym equipment also on this side. Again, depends what your preference is for this. But let's just summarize those things again by looking at the secondary light with the main light off. Quite a big difference of exposure here on this side than there is on this side. It's a bit more of a central light feel with that smaller umbrella. There's no right or wrong with these things. You get quite pronounced differences from small adjustments from this additional light. Just to recap, the main light stayed the same all the time. The Octa light didn't change position, didn't change height or power. We're just creating different emphasis from our secondary light. And then what I've done with this one is I've picked what I say would be my ideal for this scenario. I've got a bounce in here. You could use different variations of a bounce. You could have a diffusion panel over the top. You could have an ultra bounce, or something like this, which is more like California sun bounce. What I'm trying to do is catch a little bit of additional light and push it back into the models just to give a little kind of lift to the image. Let's look at what that looks like. And just kind of getting that highlight back onto the forehead might be a little bit strong, but it gives something else. And let's compare that with the high Octa. So this is the high Octa. And then on this side, it's the high Octa with the gold. I think it adds a bit of definition to the face. It cuts out a little bit of stray light that was kind of falling across the forehead. Let me just show you that position so you can see what this is. There's just a little bit of a kind of clip that's coming from the reflector. And the same from this side, I'm just clipping the light a little bit. I've angled it forward, so the light is just shaping the face a little bit more, adding a bit of kind of texture, I guess. We'll also see something in the leg. So if we look at the knees, for example, there's a little bit more lift coming from that bounce onto the reflector, and we're just shaping. It's minimal, subtle differences, but you would really notice this when you're actually photographing a real person, not just a simulation. Let me just turn that main light off as well so that we can see that. So with that main light off, we can also compare the two. So on the left-hand side, I've got the higher Octa without the main light. And then on the right-hand side, I've got the high Octa, but I've got my California sun bounce over the top. Slight difference in the way it's picking up on the sides, picking up a little bit more of the skin tone, bringing it forward again, a little bit more light onto the body, and just over the top of the head, again, a little bit more light there. So it's kind of evening things out. And the other thing we'll do, just to be really sure where we are, I'm going to turn the side light off. And then we can compare our baseline, which was the front Octa on its own, and then the front Octa with the California bounce over the top. On the left-hand side, Octa only. On the right-hand side, Octa, California bounce over the top. California bounce is toning the image again. It's bringing a bit more gold feel into it, shaping the face onto the cheekbones. And it's also softening out this shadow that's falling off just a little bit because we're catching a little bit of bounce from above. So these are really subtle differences, but you really notice them when it's photographing a real person's skin. And depending on that skin tone also, a darker skin tone will actually work really well with that bounce also. And then when the model begins to kind of reposition and you're doing different poses, you might also catch a nice little highlight in the eyes from that bounce over the top. It's not something you have to have without. You could just work perfectly well with something like the high Octa here, but it's just giving you a bit of variation. Let's just look at the final images. We'll tile them here. Hopefully when you see them tiled like this, you can see that variation, a little bit more shadow on this side. We're beginning to open it up. We're opening up it a little bit more. We're catching the highlight on the cheekbones. This one obviously is the open umbrella that we're pointing directly at the model. Here we go to the Octa, it's softening things out. If we look at them all tiled, we can see a big difference between, say, this image and then the first image, the baseline. This would be large umbrella and then a small umbrella. And it's just about that idea of shaping and the additional control you can have from a secondary light without changing your front light at all. I really just also want to highlight these sock umbrellas are great. I really recommend them. They're super cheap compared to, say, the price of getting a decent Octa. So you may end up looking at buying kit and think, okay, I want one Octa and then I can afford like a sock umbrella. And that may be a really great combination to work with. So hopefully that was useful. I think in one of the next videos, I'm going to do a breakdown of another photographer's work, but this is just building on that basis again. If you've got questions, let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching again as always.